He looked straight into my eyes, his smile as cold as discarding broken merchandise. "You're just expendable personnel." 7 days later, I sat across from federal agents, placing 31 pieces of evidence on the table that could cost him everything: his career, his reputation, and his freedom. That morning in September, I was just another senior financial analyst grinding through spreadsheets. By February, I'd become the whistleblower who brought down one of the most powerful executives in biotech. My name is Claire Donovan, and for 12 years, I built my life around spreadsheets, quarterly reports, and the fluorescent-lit corridors of Renuvia Corp. At 38, I'd climbed as high as the invisible ceiling would allow: Senior Financial Analyst, a title that meant everything and nothing in the grand hierarchy of corporate America. Greystone, Colorado, wasn't Silicon Valley or Wall Street, but Renuvia had put our mountain town on the biotech map. The company's gleaming headquarters rose like a monument to innovation against the Rockies' backdrop, all glass and steel and promises of revolutionary medical breakthroughs. I'd been there since the early days, when we operated out of a converted warehouse and everyone knew everyone's coffee order. I wasn't the type to hunger for corner offices or executive parking spots. My ambition was simpler: do good work, maintain integrity, and maybe, just maybe, make a difference in how we brought life-saving technologies to market. I'd turned down headhunters from Denver and Boston, choosing stability over salary bumps. My 2 kids needed consistency more than I needed another zero on my paycheck. Everything changed when Franklin Wyatt arrived. The board had poached him from a pharmaceutical giant back east, luring him with stock options and the promise of taking Renuvia public within 2 years. At 55, Franklin embodied everything a CFO should be, at least on paper. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with a handshake that conveyed both warmth and authority. He name-dropped Wharton within 5 minutes of any conversation and had a laugh that filled boardrooms. During his first all-hands meeting, Franklin spoke about transformational growth and maximizing shareholder value with the fervor of a televangelist. He made eye contact with everyone, even us mid-level analysts tucked in the back rows. When he smiled at me, I felt seen, important, even. How quickly that illusion shattered. The first red flag appeared 6 weeks into his tenure. I was reviewing our Q3 international partnerships when I noticed something odd: a contract with a South Korean firm I'd never heard of, signed just days before the quarter's end. The deal size was substantial, enough to bump our revenue projections significantly. But the paperwork felt off. The language was stilted, almost like someone had run it through translation software twice. The payment terms were unusually favorable to us, and the deliverables were vague to the point of meaninglessness. I flagged it to my direct supervisor, Marcus, who'd been with Renuvia even longer than I had. He glanced at my analysis, then closed my laptop screen with a gentle but firm hand. "Claire, that's a Wyatt special, direct from the C-suite. We don't question those. But the vendor verification is not our department's concern anymore." His voice carried a warning I'd never heard before. "Franklin's restructuring our oversight processes. Says we've been too conservative, too slow. Just process the numbers and move on." I moved on, but I didn't forget. Over the following months, more contracts appeared with the same peculiar characteristics. Different countries: Brazil, Romania, Singapore, but identical formatting quirks. Payment schedules that front-loaded revenue recognition. Signatures that looked digitally perfect, too perfect, like they'd been lifted from other documents. The old Claire would have kept her head down, focused on her spreadsheets. But 12 years of watching this company grow from nothing had given me a sense of ownership. However misplaced, these weren't just numbers on a screen. They represented promises to investors, to employees, to patients waiting for our therapies. So I kept digging, quietly. After hours, when the office emptied and the mountain shadows stretched across our parking lot, I'd pull archived contracts, cross-reference communication logs, trace digital footprints through our system. What I found made my stomach churn. 27 contracts, all signed within days of quarter end. all with companies that seemed to exist only on paper. No, that's not right. 28, 29. By December, I'd identified 31 potentially fraudulent contracts, representing over $40 million in recognized revenue. The glass ceiling I'd accepted for so long suddenly felt less like a barrier and more like a shield. Because now I understood why Franklin's smile had felt so cold that first day. He wasn't here to transform Renuvia. He was here to hollow it out from the inside, pump up the numbers, and cash out before anyone noticed the foundation was rotten. But I noticed, and I couldn't unknow what I knew. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning in January. I'd spent the weekend organizing my findings into a presentation, charts, timelines, digital signatures blown up to show the telltale signs of manipulation. I'd rehearsed my words, anticipating every possible objection. This wasn't about accusations, it was about protecting Renuvia from potential disaster. I scheduled a meeting with Grace Morrison, our chief legal officer. She'd always struck me as someone who valued integrity over politics. When I walked into her office with my laptop and a folder thick with evidence, her expression shifted from professional courtesy to something I couldn't quite read. "Claire, before you start," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I need to ask, have you discussed these concerns with anyone else?" "Just Marcus, initially. But he advised me to." "Good. That's good." She didn't let me finish. "Now, what exactly do you think you found?" I laid it out methodically. The pattern of quarter-end contracts, the shell companies with no digital footprint beyond incorporation documents, the recycled language and suspicious signatures. Grace listened without interrupting, her fingers steepled below her chin. When I finished, the silence stretched between us like a taut wire. "These are serious allegations," she finally said. "Allegations that could damage not just individual reputations, but Renuvia's standing in the market. Our IPO is scheduled for next fall. That's exactly why we need to address this now, before—" "Claire," her voice cut through mine with surgical precision. "I'm going to give you some advice, woman to woman. Sometimes the best thing we can do for our careers is to recognize which battles are worth fighting." The blood drained from my face. "You're asking me to ignore potential fraud?" "I'm asking you to consider your position, your value to this organization, your future." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "I'll need you to leave all documentation with me, for review, of course, and I'll need your word that this stays between us while legal conducts its assessment." I had no choice but to comply. But as I handed over my files, I noticed her desk calendar was open to next week. A meeting with Franklin Wyatt was circled in red ink. 2 days later, Marcus called me into his office. His usual warmth had evaporated. "Effective immediately, you're being reassigned to vendor relations. It's a lateral move, same salary, same benefits. Franklin specifically requested you for this new role. He values your attention to detail." Vendor relations. A dead-end department where financial analysts went to have their souls slowly extracted through mindless purchase order processing. "This is retaliation," I said. Marcus's jaw tightened. "This is an opportunity. One I suggest you take gratefully." The reassignment was immediate. My access to financial systems was revoked within hours. My new desk was in the basement, next to the loading dock. The message was clear: stay buried, stay quiet. But Franklin wasn't content with just burying me. The September all-hands meeting was held in our main auditorium, a cavernous space designed to make executives look larger than life on stage. Franklin was presenting Q3 results, spectacular numbers driven by international expansion. The contracts I'd flagged were now being celebrated as masterstrokes of business development. I sat in the back row, my new colleagues from vendor relations scattered around me. We were the invisible ones, the paper pushers who kept the machine running but were never acknowledged. Franklin was in his element, gesturing at charts showing hockey stick growth. Then, during the Q&A, someone asked about headcount optimization. "Excellent question," Franklin said, his laser pointer dancing across an org chart. We need to be strategic about human capital. Some departments are essential: R&D, sales, executive leadership. He paused, and I swear his eyes found mine in the darkness. Others are more expendable. Back office functions, for instance, in the new Renuvia, will be lean, efficient, focused on value creation. A ripple of nervous laughter swept through the auditorium. People glanced at each other, suddenly calculating their own dispensability. Franklin continued, warming to his theme. Take vendor relations. Important. Sure, but strategic? Hardly. Some employees are just expendable. His smile was razor-sharp. That's not cruel, it's business. And those who understand that will thrive here. The words hit me like ice water. This wasn't just about my reassignment. This was a public execution of my credibility, my worth, my very existence at Renuvia. Around me, colleagues shifted uncomfortably. A few threw pitying glances my way. Everyone knew I'd been a senior analyst just weeks ago. Now I was being held up as an example of corporate deadwood. That night, I sat in my car in the empty parking lot, watching the lights of Renuvia Tower flicker off floor by floor. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. Not from anger, from clarity. Franklin had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed that making me expendable would make me powerless. He was wrong. That night, I made my first real decision as a whistleblower, though I didn't know the term would eventually define me. In my home office, surrounded by boxes of family photos and my kids' artwork, I opened my personal laptop and began reconstructing everything from memory. The official files were gone, but 12 years at Renuvia had taught me the system's quirks. I still had printouts from my preliminary research, tucked between old performance reviews in my filing cabinet. More importantly, I had my personal notes, dates, contract numbers, patterns I'd observed. Every financial analyst worth their salt keeps a shadow record. Mine was about to become evidence. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a forensic archaeologist of my own work. I cross-referenced public filings with my notes, used archived versions of the company website to track vendor announcements, and leveraged my knowledge of our internal numbering system to identify the suspicious contracts in quarterly reports. The basement office, intended as my corporate coffin, became an unexpected advantage. Nobody paid attention to vendor relations. I could request old files for process improvement initiatives without raising eyebrows. I photocopied everything during lunch breaks, using the ancient copier that no one else touched because it jammed every 5th page. By October, I'd reconstructed most of my original findings and discovered something new. The 31 contracts followed an almost algorithmic pattern. Same structure, same payment terms, same vague deliverables. It was as if someone had created a template for fraud and simply changed the names and locations. I needed help. The kind that wouldn't come from within Renuvia's walls. Daniel Ruiz and I had worked together 5 years earlier on a routine audit. He'd been Renuvia's external compliance consultant then, a sharp-eyed former SEC investigator who'd made me nervous with his ability to spot discrepancies I'd missed. We'd stayed in touch through LinkedIn, exchanging the occasional holiday greeting or job market insight. Now he worked for the Department of Justice, investigating corporate fraud. I called him from a burner phone I'd bought with cash at a truck stop outside Greystone. "Claire Donovan," he said, recognizing my voice despite the unknown number. "It's been a while. How's life at Renuvia?" "I need to talk to you, not as a former colleague, as someone who might have information relevant to your current job." The silence on his end lasted long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" he finally asked. "I have documentation suggesting systematic contract fraud, 31 instances, over 40 million in potentially fraudulent revenue recognition." "Jesus, Claire!" I heard him exhale slowly. "You know what you're opening up here. Once you cross this line, there's no going back." "I'm already across it. They've made that clear." We met at a diner in Denver, halfway between Greystone and his office. Daniel looked older, grayer around the temples, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. I slid a manila envelope across the cracked formica table. He flipped through my reconstructed evidence, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is good work," he said finally. "But it's not enough. I need originals, system logs, something that proves these documents were actually submitted to your financial system. Otherwise, it's your word against a CFO with a sterling reputation and an army of lawyers." My heart sank. I don't have system access anymore. They moved me to, I know, vendor relations, classic retaliation move. He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "But you still work there. You still have a badge. And from what I remember, you know that system better than the people who designed it." "You're not suggesting..." "I'm not suggesting anything." He pushed a business card across the table. Not his official DOJ card, but a plain white one with just a phone number. "But if additional documentation were to surface, properly obtained, of course, that number will reach me directly." The drive back to Greystone felt like crossing into enemy territory. Every car in my rearview mirror could be following me. Every glance from a coworker might be suspicion. But Daniel was right. I knew Renuvia's systems. More importantly, I knew its vulnerabilities. The executive floor cleared out by 6. The financial systems ran automatic backups at midnight. And my badge, despite the reassignment, still opened doors it shouldn't. A typical oversight in a company that valued appearance over actual security. I began planning my own investigation, knowing that every step forward was a step away from the safe, predictable life I'd built. My kids asked why I was working late so often. My ex-husband complained about schedule changes. My mother wondered why I looked so tired during our Sunday calls. I couldn't tell any of them that I was about to attempt something that would either expose one of the largest frauds in biotech history or destroy what was left of my career. Franklin thought he'd neutralized me by making me expendable. What he'd actually done was free me from having anything left to lose. The surveillance started subtly. A black Audi appeared in my neighborhood, always parked just far enough away to seem coincidental. My personal email began glitching. Messages marked as read that I hadn't opened, drafts that disappeared mid-sentence. My phone developed an odd echo during calls, and the battery drained twice as fast as usual. I wasn't paranoid. I was a target. The escalation came in November. I'd stayed late legitimately. Vendor relations had a massive purchase order backlog that actually needed attention. As I walked to my car in the nearly empty parking garage, footsteps echoed behind me. They matched my pace perfectly, stopping when I stopped, speeding up when I did. I fumbled for my keys, heart hammering. The footsteps grew closer. I spun around, ready to scream, and found myself face to face with Tom Sullivan, Renuvia's head of security. "Working late, Claire?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dedication like that should be rewarded." "Just catching up on purchase orders," I managed. "Of course." He glanced at my car, then back at me. "You should be careful driving home. Winter's coming early this year. Black ice can be treacherous. Accidents happen so easily." The threat couldn't have been clearer if he'd held a knife to my throat. 2 days later, HR summoned me. Franklin was there, sitting behind the conference table like a judge at sentencing. Between us lay a separation agreement. "We're restructuring vendor relations," said Patricia, our Chief Human Resources Officer. "Your position is being eliminated. However, we're prepared to offer a generous severance package." I scanned the document. 3 months' salary, continued health insurance through year-end, and there it was. A comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and non-disparagement clause. "What happens if I don't sign?" I asked. Franklin leaned forward. "Then you leave today with nothing. No severance, no insurance continuation, no reference. Just another expendable employee who couldn't adapt to change. I need time to review this with an attorney. You have until 5 o'clock today." His voice was silk over steel. "I'd think carefully. Claire, you have children, don't you? College isn't cheap. And in this economy, finding another position at your age with a termination on your record..." I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady. "I'll let you know by 5. But I'd already decided. I walked out of that room, past the cubicles full of colleagues who avoided eye contact, down to my basement office. I packed my personal items, what little remained, and left my badge on the desk. At 4:59, I sent a one-line email from the parking lot. I decline your offer. My phone rang immediately. Franklin himself. You're making a mistake, he said without preamble. Maybe. But it's mine to make. Claire. His tone shifted, becoming almost paternal. I know you think you're doing something noble here, but you're not a hero. You're just a bitter woman who couldn't handle being ordinary. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you can prove, it won't matter. I have resources you can't imagine. Is that a threat? It's reality. Last chance. Sign the agreement, take the money, move on with your life. I hung up. That night, I discovered what resources meant. My car, parked in my driveway, had a flat tire. Not slashed, that would be too obvious. Just a slow leak that would have sent me careening off the mountain road during my morning commute if I hadn't noticed the tilt. My credit card started declining. A system error, the bank said. My mortgage company called about a missed payment I knew I'd made. My kids' school reported that I'd failed to submit required health forms, though I had copies of the submissions. The message was clear. Franklin could make my life hell without leaving a single fingerprint. But he'd miscalculated. Every attack strengthened my resolve. I documented everything, the surveillance, the threats, the systematic harassment. Daniel had said I needed more evidence. Franklin was creating it for me. I moved my kids to my mother's house, claiming a plumbing issue. I varied my routes, used cash exclusively, communicated through encrypted apps. I became someone I didn't recognize, paranoid, secretive, always looking over my shoulder. The final straw came in early December. I'd gone for a morning run, my one remaining routine. The trail was icy but manageable. I knew every route, every turn. Which is why I noticed the wire stretched across the path at ankle height, nearly invisible in the dawn light. I stopped inches before it would have sent me tumbling down a 30-foot embankment. They weren't just trying to silence me anymore. They were trying to eliminate me. That afternoon, I called Daniel from a payphone at a rest stop 50 miles outside Greystone. I'm ready to go on record, I said. Everything. The fraud, the retaliation, the threats. But I need protection. How bad is it? I told him about the wire, the car, the escalating harassment. Jesus. Okay. Can you get to Denver, safely? Yes. Federal building, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Come alone. Bring everything, and I mean everything. Documents, dates, names. We're going to build a case that makes Franklin Wyatt wish he'd never heard your name. As I drove home through the mountain passes, I thought about the word Franklin had used. Expendable. He was about to learn that expendable people had nothing left to lose. And that made us the most dangerous kind. The federal building in Denver felt like entering a fortress. Metal detectors, armed guards, cameras tracking every movement. For the first time in months, I felt safe. Daniel met me in the lobby with two other agents, Sarah Martinez from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division and James Okonkwo from the SEC. They led me to a windowless conference room where boxes of empty binders waited like hungry mouths. Before we start, Sarah said, placing a recorder on the table. I need you to understand what you're initiating. Once we open an official investigation, you become a federal witness. Your life changes. Are you prepared for that? I thought of the wire across the trail. My life already changed. I'm prepared to see this through. For the next 8 hours, we built the case methodically. I walked them through each contract, showing the patterns I'd identified. Daniel had brought in a forensic accountant who specialized in digital signatures. She confirmed what I'd suspected. The signatures were sophisticated forgeries, likely created using lifted exemplars from legitimate documents. This is good, James said, reviewing my reconstructed timeline. But we need to verify these contracts within Renuvia's system. We need proof they were entered into the financial records, approved through the proper channels, and used for revenue recognition. I can help with that, I said. I know someone inside who might cooperate. Marcus Chen, my former supervisor. He's been there 15 years. He knew something was wrong but was too scared to act. Sarah shook her head. Too risky. If he tips off Wyatt, the whole investigation collapses. We need another way. That's when I remembered the backup protocols. Renuvia's disaster recovery system created redundant copies of all financial data, stored off-site. The location was supposed to be known only to IT leadership, but I'd been involved in the implementation years ago. There might be another way, I said. By January, the investigation had expanded beyond my wildest expectations. The DOJ had quietly subpoenaed the backup data, revealing not just the 31 contracts I'd identified, but dozens more across multiple quarters. The pattern was clear. Franklin had been inflating revenue since his first month at Renuvia. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Vanessa Liu, a junior accountant who'd been hired directly by Franklin, approached the FBI independently. She'd been ordered to create the false contracts and had kept copies of everything, including emails where Franklin explicitly directed the fraud. He told me it was standard practice, she said in her deposition, that everyone did it to smooth out quarterly earnings. When I questioned it, he said I was being naive. That I'd never make it in corporate finance if I couldn't play the game. With 2 whistleblowers and mounting evidence, the DOJ accelerated their timeline. They needed to move before Franklin could destroy evidence or flee the country. Sarah called me on a Tuesday evening in February. It's happening tomorrow. 6 a.m. raid on Renuvia headquarters and Franklin's home simultaneously. We'll need you available for immediate follow-up interviews. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my empty house, the kids still at my mother's for safety, and waited for dawn. At exactly 6 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Eagles have landed. The operation unfolded with military precision. FBI agents swept through Renuvia's executive floor, seizing computers, files, and servers. Franklin was arrested at his home in Aspen, still in his monogrammed pajamas. The image of him being led away in handcuffs would later become the defining photo of the scandal. But the investigation revealed more than just fraud. Hidden in Franklin's personal files were communications with a network of shell companies, evidence of bribery, and connections to offshore accounts holding millions in diverted funds. The 31 contracts I discovered were just the tip of the iceberg. By noon, the story had broken nationally. Biotech giant rocked by fraud scandal, screamed the headlines. Renuvia's stock price plummeted 40% in hours. Trading was halted. My phone exploded with calls from reporters, former colleagues, friends who'd had no idea what I'd been going through. I ignored them all, following Sarah's instructions to remain unavailable for comment. That evening, as I watched the news coverage from my living room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Vindication, not joy, not triumph, just the cold satisfaction of being right when everyone had tried to convince me I was wrong. The investigation would continue for months. Depositions, grand jury testimonies, forensic accounting that would uncover the full scope of Franklin's crimes. But the hardest part was over. The man who'd called me expendable was heading for a federal cell. And the truth I'd risked everything to expose was finally in the light. Vanessa called me that night. Thank you, she said simply. For being brave enough to go first, I never would have found the courage without knowing someone else had seen it too. I thought about all the corporate whistleblowers who'd come before me, the ones whose names I'd read in cautionary tales and ethics textbooks. I'd joined their ranks now, for better or worse. We did the right thing, I told her. And for the first time in months, I actually believed it. The February morning when FBI agents descended on Renuvia headquarters became known as Black Wednesday in Greystone. I watched from my kitchen window as news vans lined the streets below the office complex, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metallic prayers. The footage was everywhere by lunch. Franklin Wyatt, the untouchable CFO, being escorted from his Aspen mansion at dawn, his silver hair disheveled, his designer suit replaced by a gray tracksuit, his wrists bound by federal-issue handcuffs. The image played on repeat across every major network. Inside Renuvia, chaos reigned. Sarah Martinez called me with updates throughout the day. "They're finding more than we expected," she said during one brief check-in. "Your 31 contracts led us to a whole secondary set of books." This goes back years, Claire. Years before Franklin even arrived. The implication hit me like cold water. Franklin wasn't the architect. He was the latest conductor of an ongoing symphony of fraud. By evening, the scope had exploded. 17 arrests across 3 states. The entire executive leadership team was suspended pending investigation. Board members resigned in droves. Renuvia's stock didn't just plummet, it was delisted entirely. The media couldn't get enough. Financial reporters who'd celebrated Renuvia's meteoric rise now competed to expose its darkest secrets. My name stayed out of it initially. The DOJ had promised anonymity during the active investigation. But reporters aren't stupid. They connected dots. The timing of my departure, my role in financial analysis, the sudden raid following months of quiet investigation. Within a week, someone leaked my identity. Whistleblower X, revealed. Single mother took down biotech giant, ran the headline in the Denver Post. They'd found my LinkedIn profile, my photo from Renuvia's last annual report, even my kids' school information. I had to pull them out of school. The reporters were relentless, camping outside my mother's house, following my ex-husband to work, trying to interview my neighbors. My daughter, 14 and fierce, wanted to confront them. My son, 2 years younger, just wanted to know when we could go home. Soon. I lied, having no idea what home even meant anymore. The legal proceedings moved with glacial precision. Franklin's army of attorneys filed motion after motion, trying to suppress evidence, claiming entrapment, arguing prosecutorial overreach. But the FBI had done their homework. Every document was authenticated, every witness verified, every digital trail preserved. In March, Franklin's co-conspirators began flipping. Patricia from HR admitted to destroying personnel files that showed pattern harassment of potential whistleblowers. Tom Sullivan confessed to organizing surveillance and intimidation campaigns against multiple employees over the years. Even Grace Morrison, the chief legal officer who tried to bury my concerns, cut a deal in exchange for testimony. The trial was set for September. I would be the prosecution's star witness, the one who'd connected the dots everyone else had chosen to ignore. Sarah and James spent weeks preparing me, running through potential questions, teaching me to remain calm under hostile cross-examination. "They'll try to paint you as disgruntled," Sarah warned. "A bitter employee seeking revenge for a legitimate reassignment. They'll dig into your personal life, your divorce, your finances. Nothing is off-limits." She was right. Franklin's defense team hired investigators who uncovered every imperfection in my past. The credit card debt from my divorce, the therapy sessions after my father's death, the performance review from 5 years ago where Marcus had noted I could be inflexible regarding company policies. They leaked it all to friendly media outlets. Suddenly, I wasn't a brave whistleblower, I was a troubled woman with an axe to grind. Opinion pieces questioned my motives. Anonymous online comments suggested I'd fabricated evidence for a future book deal. But for every hit piece, there were 10 messages of support. Former Renuvia employees reached out with their own stories. Investors thanked me for exposing the truth before they lost even more. Other whistleblowers from different companies shared advice and encouragement. The September trial became a media circus. Court TV provided wall-to-wall coverage. Financial analysts dissected every revelation. The courthouse steps became a daily battlefield of competing narratives. I testified for 3 days. Franklin's attorney, a sharp-dressed shark named Morrison Keller, tried every trick. He questioned my mental state, my qualifications, my ability to understand complex financial instruments. He suggested I'd misinterpreted legitimate international expansion as fraud, but I had the evidence. Document after document, pattern after pattern, email after email. When he tried to confuse me with financial jargon, I responded with the kind of detailed analysis that only comes from 12 years of living in those numbers. When he suggested I was motivated by revenge, I simply pointed to the 31 fabricated contracts. "Mrs. Donovan," he said during a particularly heated exchange, "isn't it true that you were designated as expendable by Renuvia's leadership?" "Yes," I replied, meeting Franklin's eyes across the courtroom. Mr. Wyatt made that very clear. He said I was expendable, but the truth isn't expendable. The law isn't expendable, and the investors and employees who trusted Renuvia weren't expendable either. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all 17 federal counts. Franklin Wyatt faced up to 25 years in federal prison. The other defendants fell like dominoes, accepting plea deals or facing their own convictions. As the verdict was read, I felt no joy. Only exhaustion and a strange emptiness. I'd won. But what exactly had I won? My career at Renuvia was dead. My reputation in the industry was forever linked to scandal. My kids had endured months of upheaval. Outside the courthouse, reporters thrust microphones in my face. "How does it feel to be vindicated?" they shouted. "What's next for you?" I pushed past them without answering. Vindication was too small a word for what I felt. I'd done what was right, but right and easy were universes apart. That night, as my children slept in yet another temporary home, I sat on the porch and watched the stars above Greystone. Somewhere out there, Franklin Wyatt was being processed into federal custody. Somewhere, Renuvia's towers stood empty, awaiting liquidation, and somewhere in between, I sat with the knowledge that being expendable had made me indispensable to justice. The October morning was crisp when I drove past Renuvia's headquarters for the last time. The parking lot that once held 1,000 cars stood empty except for a few security vehicles. The gleaming towers that had symbolized biotech innovation now bore "Available for lease" banners across their glass facades. I parked across the street and sat in my car, watching maintenance crews remove the massive Renuvia logo from the main building. Each letter came down with mechanical precision, leaving ghost outlines on the concrete, shadows of what had been. The financial settlement never came. Despite promises from the DOJ about whistleblower protections and potential rewards, the legal reality was harsher. Renuvia's assets were frozen, tied up in bankruptcy proceedings that would take years to resolve. Investors, employees with worthless stock options, and unpaid vendors stood in line ahead of any whistleblower claim. I didn't care about the money anymore, but I worried about the others, the junior employees who'd lost their jobs overnight, the researchers whose life-saving work had been abandoned, the patients who would never receive treatments that might have helped them. They were the true expendables in Franklin's game. My phone buzzed, an email from the Department of Justice. "Ms. Donovan, we are pleased to inform you that based on the successful prosecution of Franklin Wyatt and associated parties, the DOJ is recommending you for inclusion in the Federal Whistleblower Protection Program. This designation provides enhanced security measures and employment protections for individuals who have provided crucial testimony in major federal cases. Please contact our office to discuss the details. Sarah Martinez." I stared at the email, then deleted it. Protection programs, witness security, federal designations. These were bandages on a wound that would never fully heal. I'd learned that justice and healing were different creatures entirely. Over the following months, I rebuilt quietly. A small consulting firm in Denver hired me to review their financial controls. The owner had followed the trial and wanted someone who wouldn't look the other way. The work was mundane compared to Renuvia's cutting-edge biotech, but it was honest, clean. My kids adjusted to their new school. My daughter joined the debate team, channeling her anger into structured arguments. My son discovered coding, building virtual worlds where the rules were clear and cheaters couldn't prosper. We didn't talk about Renuvia much, but sometimes I'd catch them reading news updates about the ongoing legal proceedings. Franklin Wyatt was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The judge called his actions a betrayal of the fundamental trust that underpins our financial system. he'd serve his time in a minimum security facility. Of course, white-collar criminals always did. But 18 years was 18 years, whether spent in a cell or a campus. One evening in March, almost exactly a year after everything began, Marcus called. I hadn't heard from him since the day he'd warned me to drop my investigation. "Claire," he said, his voice older, tired. "I wanted to. I needed to say I'm sorry. You were right about everything, and I was a coward." "We all make choices," I replied. "You made the right one. It cost you everything, but you made it anyway. That's something. That's really something." After we hung up, I walked out to my small backyard. The mountains were visible in the distance, the same Rockies that had backdropped Renuvia's towers. But from here, they looked different. Cleaner, somehow. Less complicated. I thought about Franklin's word, expendable. He'd meant it as a judgment, a dismissal, a way to categorize human worth by corporate utility. But being expendable had freed me in ways he never anticipated. When you have nothing left to lose, you can afford to tell the truth. The consulting work grew. Word spread that I was thorough, ethical, unafraid to ask uncomfortable questions. Companies hired me not despite my whistleblower past, but because of it. They wanted someone who'd proven they wouldn't bend when pressure came. I never did media interviews. The reporters eventually stopped calling. The story faded from headlines, replaced by new scandals, new frauds, new whistleblowers making impossible choices. But sometimes I'd receive emails from strangers, accountants, analysts, employees who'd noticed something wrong and didn't know what to do. "Be careful," I'd write back. "Document everything. Find allies. Know that it will cost you more than you expect. But also know that staying silent costs something too. Maybe not today, but eventually." On a cold December morning, I stood where I'm standing now, in front of Renuvia's abandoned headquarters. The buildings had been sold to a real estate developer who planned to convert them into luxury apartments. Mountain View Residences, the new signs proclaimed. No mention of what had been before. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward the entrance. A construction worker was removing the last traces of Renuvia's logo from the lobby floor. "Expendable," I whispered, watching the letters disappear under industrial machinery. Then I turned and walked away, leaving Franklin Wyatt's word behind in the rubble where it belonged. Because I'd learned something Franklin never understood. Being expendable wasn't about worth. It was about freedom. The freedom to choose truth over comfort, integrity over security, justice over silence. And in the end, that freedom made me anything but expendable. It made me unforgettable. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Claire's position? Your perspective matters, and I read every comment. Until next time, stay strong and keep standing up for what's right.